What happens when a CEO disguises himself to restock bakery shelves and ends up stopping everything because a worker was punished for taking home a bag of leftover bread? Franklin Pierce had inherited the bakery chain from his father 5 years ago. 10 stores across the state, all proudly family-owned since the 70s. His dad used to know every baker by name. Franklin, not so much. He spent most of his time at the main office, buried in spreadsheets, meetings, and reports. But things fell off lately, customer complaints piling up, sudden staff turnover in 2 stores, and one district manager always brushing off concerns with "we'll handle it." Franklin didn't want filtered updates anymore. He needed to see it for himself. He picked Store 7, a mid-sized location in a working-class suburb. It wasn't the worst-performing store, but it had enough red flags to raise his suspicion. He figured the best way to see the truth was to become part of the staff. With the help of HR, he put together a fake identity, Fred Palmer, a recently divorced man looking for part-time work. He dyed his hair a few shades darker, grew out some stubble, swapped his tailored suits for a thrift store hoodie and jeans, and wore thick glasses. None of the employees had ever met him personally. Store visits were always handled by district managers, so no one would recognize the CEO. He was hired as a stock assistant through a temp agency that the company used to fill in when stores were short-staffed. Store 7 was running with barely enough people to open each day. 2 people had recently quit due to schedule conflicts, which the manager, Matt, brushed off during hiring. "Just restock the shelves, don't talk too much, and stay out of the way," Matt told Franklin on his first day, without even looking up from his phone. The bakery was a mix of fresh goods and packaged items from the main facility. Franklin started at 5 in the morning, hauling trays of bread and pastries from the back, while half listening to morning banter between 2 employees, Kendra, a cashier in her late 20s, and Manny, a night baker with flour always stuck to his beard. By day 3, Franklin was in pain. His back ached from the early shifts, and he'd cut his hand trying to open a crate. But he also started noticing things. Kendra never complained, even when customers were rude. She'd smile, stay calm, and help them anyway. Manny baked through the night alone with barely a break, and always made sure the display looked perfect. But there was tension whenever Matt walked in. People went quiet. The energy dropped. Matt barked orders, criticized minor things, and never lifted a finger to help. One morning, Franklin overheard something that made him stop mid-cart. "I saw you take that bag last night," Matt said coldly. "It was just the leftover rolls," Manny replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "They were going in the trash. I've done it a few times." "I didn't think it's stealing," Matt snapped. "You're suspended for 3 days. Do it again and you're fired." Franklin stood frozen behind a rack of bagels, heart thudding. He waited until Matt stormed off before walking over. "Hey," Franklin said carefully. "You okay?" Manny looked embarrassed. "Yeah, whatever. Just gotta ride it out." "You took trash bread home?" "That's it." "Yeah, man. My cousin's got 3 kids. I just bring the extras over sometimes. They love the sourdough." Franklin didn't know what to say. He'd never given a second thought to what happened to leftovers. His reports never showed that. Just profit margins and waste percentages. He spent the rest of the shift restocking shelves, but his mind was racing. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his car outside the store long after it closed, watching the last lights switch off. His dad would have never let something like this slide. Next morning, Franklin showed up early. Manny wasn't there. Kendra noticed. "They suspended him for that," she said as she rang up a woman buying 2 croissants. "It's not even against policy. We're supposed to toss them anyway. Most of us let it slide." Franklin nodded slowly. "Does this kind of thing happen a lot?" She hesitated. "Matt's been cracking down lately. He says it's about discipline. But honestly, we're short-handed, and he doesn't help. He just likes control." Franklin clenched his jaw. He'd seen enough. He wiped his hands on his apron, walked to the office and knocked. Matt barely looked up. "Whatcha need?" "We need to talk," Franklin said, voice steady. "But not as Fred." Matt frowned. "What?" Franklin reached into his pocket and pulled out his ID. "Franklin Pierce. I own this place." Matt's face went pale. "I've been working here for a week. I've seen how you treat people. I saw what you did to Manny." Matt started to speak, but Franklin raised a hand. "Save it. We're having a meeting. Today. You, me, and the staff. I'm not walking away from this." Matt didn't say a word. Just stared, stunned. Franklin stepped out of the office, heart pounding. He didn't know exactly what came next. But for the first time in a long while, he knew he was doing the right thing. Franklin didn't return to the floor. He sat in the manager's office, door closed, waiting. The room was bare. A whiteboard with the weekly schedule was missing 3 names, and a stack of unopened vendor invoices sat on the edge of the desk. Matt lingered by the pastry case for another 10 minutes, pretending to check inventory, clearly stalling. When he finally stepped into the office, he closed the door with exaggerated care. Franklin didn't look up. He was reading a shift report, one that showed Manny had clocked in for every overnight bake with no missed days for months. "You've been here, what, 3 years?" Franklin asked plainly. "For in October." Franklin finally met his eyes. "Then you know better than to suspend a man over a bag of bread." "It sets a precedent," Matt said, defensive now. "If I let one guy take food, the rest follow. Next thing you know, we're writing off half the inventory." "Except it wasn't inventory," Franklin said. "It was marked for waste. There's a difference." Matt crossed his arms. "We can't run a business on sympathy." Franklin stood up. "We're not a cold storage warehouse. We're a bakery. We feed people. We hire from this community. We grew because people trusted us. That doesn't happen with policies that punish decency." Matt's expression hardened. "You want me to be soft? That's not how you run a tight ship." Franklin stepped around the desk. "You don't run a tight ship. You run a fearful one." Before Matt could respond, Franklin opened the door. "Get the team in here. Everyone on shift. Now." Matt hesitated. "Now." 10 minutes later, 6 employees gathered in the cramped back room. Kendra leaned against the wall, arms folded. The morning prep cook, a quiet man named Lewis, stood near the sink, still wearing his gloves. A younger part-time cashier, Bria, looked confused but curious. No one spoke. Franklin stood in front of them. No disguise now. His hoodie was gone, replaced by a button-down he kept in his car. He still had flour on his shoes. "I'm not Fred," he said. "My name's Franklin Pierce. I own this company." The silence broke into a ripple of murmurs. "I've been working here undercover for the past week. I stalked, cleaned, and watched. I didn't come to spy. I came because I needed to see what's really happening on the floor." He paused, letting the air settle. "Manny's not here today because he was suspended for taking bread that was going to be thrown away. I saw it happen. It was wrong. And it's not the only thing that's wrong." Kendra stepped forward. "Are you saying he's not in trouble?" "I'm saying he should never have been in trouble." Matt shifted in the corner, arms still crossed. Franklin turned to him. "I want you to clock out. You're done here." Matt looked stunned. "You're firing me?" "Yes." "For enforcing waste policy? For acting like your job is to intimidate instead of lead? For punishing people who show more heart than you've shown in 4 years? For failing to support a team that's kept this store running without you lifting a hand?" Matt's mouth opened, but he said nothing. He stormed out without another word. Franklin turned back to the team. "I owe all of you an apology for letting this store get to this point, for being so far removed that I didn't know how bad it had become." Bria raised her hand, nervous. "Are we in trouble? For anything?" "No," Franklin said. You've been doing your jobs under pressure no one should have to work under. You're understaffed, unsupported, and still showing up. That tells me a lot. Lewis spoke quietly. We don't want special treatment. Just respect. You'll get it, Franklin said. Starting now. He spent the next hour sitting with them, one by one. No forms, no managers. Just real conversations. Kendra asked for consistent scheduling. Her classes at the community college kept getting ignored when shifts were assigned. Franklin promised to work with HR on a flexible schedule system within the week. Bria, who had only been there 2 months, said she'd been yelled at by Matt in front of customers. She'd almost quit twice. Franklin asked her if she wanted to stay. I do, she said. If it's different. It will be. Lewis explained how the prep area hadn't had a working scale in weeks, so he'd been eyeballing measurements. Franklin made a note to have equipment replaced by the next day. By mid-afternoon, Franklin called Manny. I was wrong to let this happen, he said. There was a long pause on the other end. You're the guy from the bread racks? I am. You looked miserable. I was. Manny laughed once, then grew serious. You're calling to fire me? Opposite. I want you back. With back pay for the missed days. And I'd like you to help train the new manager when we find one. Another pause. I'll think about it. Fair enough. When Franklin returned to the floor, the mood had shifted. It wasn't celebration. It was cautious hope. He didn't expect immediate trust, but he could feel the tension breaking. He spent the rest of the day helping Lewis clean the prep table and stocking trays with Bria. At closing, he took out the trash with Kendra and stood outside for a moment, watching the sky turn dusky orange. You really going to stay involved after this? She asked. I don't plan on disappearing again. Good. Because we're not just workers. We're the face people see every day. I know that now, he said. And I won't forget it again. He drove home that night without turning on the radio. He didn't need noise. His thoughts were already full. Tomorrow, he'd meet with HR. The hiring pipeline needed fixing. The equipment budget needed revisiting. And he wanted to launch a new policy. Any leftover food, once cleared for safety, could be donated or taken home. No warnings. No exceptions. He had no illusions. One store was just the start. But it was the right start. And it was long overdue. The following morning, Franklin arrived at Store 7 before sunrise. The air outside was sharp with cold, the kind that stung your hands if you stood still too long. He kept his coat on as he unlocked the back entrance with a temporary override code, one of the few privileges he hadn't revoked from himself during his time undercover. Inside, the prep area was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Lewis was already there, bent over the stainless steel table, slowly slicing apples for the morning danishes. He looked up, nodded once, then went back to work. Franklin didn't interrupt. He washed his hands at the utility sink, rolled up his sleeves, and began unpacking the fresh delivery crates that had been dropped off half an hour earlier. No one spoke for a while, but the silence was comfortable, less wary than it had been days ago. Eventually Lewis said, Manny texted me. He's coming in tonight. Franklin gave a single nod. Good. Lewis didn't say anything else, just kept slicing. That was enough for now. By the time the rest of the morning crew trickled in, Franklin had already reorganized the dry storage shelves, replaced 2 broken clipboards, and left a note for maintenance about the flickering prep light. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply didn't want to waste time watching from a distance again. The temporary shift lead, a wiry, middle-aged woman named Nora, who had been brought in on short notice, was reviewing cashier assignments when Kendra approached him. Heard you're staying hands-on, she said as they stood near the front register. You really mean that? As long as it takes, Franklin said. You still juggling classes? She nodded. Finals are coming up. I'll be limited to weekends soon. Let's talk after lunch. I want to make sure your schedule doesn't get dumped on someone else. She raised an eyebrow. You're not going to just throw it at Bria? Already spoke with her. She's got exams, too. Kendra exhaled slowly, as if weighing whether to believe him. She didn't respond, but didn't walk away either. By early afternoon, the store had settled into a rhythm. Customers came in waves, mostly regulars, construction workers grabbing lunch, a group of retirees who always split a pot of coffee, a woman with twin toddlers who liked the cinnamon rolls more than they could eat them. Franklin watched from a distance, not interfering unless someone asked. He focused on the things no one noticed, how the cash drawer stuck slightly when closed, how the heat lamps on the sandwich station ran a little too hot, how the display case lighting flickered at the corner. None of these things screamed crisis, but together they wore people down. He was reviewing the service logs when Nora approached him near the coffee station. "Got a situation," she said quietly. "Guy at table 4's been sitting there for 2 hours. No order, just using the outlets. He's making Bria uncomfortable." Franklin glanced across the room. A man in his early 40s sat hunched over a laptop, a tangle of charging cables snaking across the floor. He hadn't bought anything. 2 empty water cups sat beside him. Bria stood at the far end of the counter, eyes flicking toward the table every few seconds. "Did anyone ask him to order?" "I did. He said he was deciding. That was over an hour ago." Franklin walked over. "Afternoon," he said evenly. "You planning to order anything?" The man didn't look up. "I'm working. This is a bakery, not a workspace. We ask that customers order if they're going to stay." The man finally looked at him. "What, you don't want people like me here?" Franklin didn't blink. "People who don't pay? No, I don't. Maybe I'm waiting for someone. Then you can wait outside." The man shoved his laptop into his bag, muttering something under his breath, and left without another word. Franklin turned to Bria. "You all right?" She nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly as she wiped the counter. He didn't press. At closing, Franklin gathered the staff in the back. Not for a speech, he'd already said what needed saying, but to walk them through the next steps. "I've asked HR to send someone in tomorrow," he said. "Not to audit. Just to listen. Policy's one thing. Culture's another." Bria raised her hand. "Are we allowed to talk freely? Like really freely?" "You can say what you need to say. That's the point." Nora leaned against the dry rack. "You want to fix this place long term. It's not just about policies. It's about who gets to enforce them." Franklin looked at her. "You thinking of applying for the manager role?" "I'm thinking about it," she said. "But only if this doesn't go back to how it was." "It won't." She nodded once, then left to finish locking up. After everyone headed out, Franklin stayed behind. He swept the back hallway, something he hadn't done since his second shift, and paused by the waste bin where unsold loaves were discarded. He picked up a half-full bag of sourdough, still warm, and stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow, the new donation policy would roll out fresh partnerships with local shelters and food pantries already in motion. But tonight, the bag would go home with him. Just this once. He drove across town, stopped at a small brick house with a sagging porch, and knocked. A woman in her 30s opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. "I'm looking for Manny's cousin," he said gently. "He said the kids like sourdough." She blinked, then stepped back to let him in. Inside, the living room was quiet. 3 children peeked around the hallway corner, wide-eyed. Franklin handed her the bag. "It's from the bakery," he said. "We were going to throw it out." She didn't ask who he was. She just nodded and took it with both hands. On the way back to his car, Franklin didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man who'd just started learning what running a company really meant. Back at Store 7, the lights were off. The windows reflected the street lamps, hiding the shelves behind them. Tomorrow, there would be more problems. More decisions to make. But tonight, the building was quiet. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the silence wasn't hiding anything. 2 weeks had passed since Franklin revealed himself and removed Matt from the store. The changes he initiated were still settling in, but the pace was deliberate, not rushed. Franklin knew better than to believe culture could be fixed with an announcement or a new policy binder. Trust wasn't a switch. It had to be earned, 1 hour at a time. Store 7 was still understaffed, but now the schedule was honest about it. No more hidden gaps patched over by last-minute calls or guilt-tripping part-timers. Franklin had authorized overtime for those willing to pick up extra hours voluntarily. He also brought in 2 floaters from nearby stores, one of whom, a calm, even-keeled woman named Patrice, had immediately taken pressure off the front counter. Franklin hadn't stepped back into the corporate office yet. He rotated through early mornings and late closings, sometimes just helping clean the coffee grinders or organizing the walk-in. He didn't make a show of it, didn't try to lead every conversation. He was watching, listening, learning who people were when no one thought they had to impress anyone. One afternoon, he sat at the break table with Nora, who had officially applied for the manager position. Her references from another district checked out solid. She was direct and didn't waste time with small talk. That alone made her stand out. "I've been through 3 district managers in 5 years," she said. "Only one ever actually worked a shift with me." Franklin leaned back. What made them worth remembering? They weren't afraid to admit when they didn't know something. "That's rare. You think I don't know what I'm doing? I think you're learning fast." "But yeah," she said without hesitation, "if you didn't know enough when you walked in here." "That's not a judgment. It's a fact." He nodded once. "What would you change first if I gave you the keys tomorrow?" "Weekly check-ins," she said. 15 minutes. One-on-one. No clipboard, no script. Just ask people how they're holding up. Most of the time, they'll tell you what's broken before it shows in the numbers. He didn't reply right away. Just wrote it down in his notebook, the one he'd kept since day 1 undercover. He hadn't shown it to anyone. Not yet. Later that evening, Franklin walked the floor with Patrice. She pointed out a recurring issue with the receipt printer jamming during peak hours, something no one had flagged in reports because it didn't affect inventory or sales. But it slowed the line by a few seconds each time, especially when customers needed itemized receipts for business expenses. "You think I should just replace it?" he asked. "You already know the answer," she said. "Yeah." "Then why ask?" He looked toward the front windows. A few regulars were seated at the corner table, chatting over coffee. "Because I used to make every decision based on cost breakdowns, not experience." Patrice didn't say anything, just nodded once, then went back to prepping change for the next shift. That night, Franklin stopped by Manny's station in the back. The baker had returned without ceremony, picked up where he left off, and hadn't mentioned the suspension again. But Franklin knew that didn't mean it had vanished from his memory. "You doing all right back here?" Franklin asked. Manny glanced up from shaping dough. "You asking as Fred or Franklin?" "Franklin." "Then yeah, I am." Franklin leaned against the wall. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said. About feeding your cousin's kids." Manny didn't answer, just kept working. "I don't want to run a place where people have to hide kindness." "Then don't," Manny said simply. Franklin nodded. "We finalized the donation route. First pickups this weekend. Shelters are on board. Food's going where it should." "That's good," Manny said, wiping his hands. "Just don't let some new policy undo it 2 years from now." "I won't." The next morning, HR sent someone from corporate to conduct follow-up interviews. Not to audit, as Franklin had promised, but to document lived experience. The woman, Karen, had worked in the company for over a decade and had a reputation for patience and fairness. She set up at a table near the back and met with employees one by one. Franklin didn't sit in. He waited outside. After the last interview wrapped, Karen stepped out to find him. "You've got a good team," she said. "I know. They're tired. But they're not bitter. That's rare. They've had too many reasons to be bitter." "True." but they're still here. That's something. Franklin walked her out and thanked her, then returned to the prep area, where Bria was sorting new uniforms. He'd approved a full restock after learning half the staff were wearing aprons with torn straps or name tags, so faded they were unreadable. "These are the right sizes?" he asked. Bria held one up. "I think so. Kendra helped me with the list." "Good." She hesitated. "You think we're going to keep all these changes?" Franklin looked at her. "Why wouldn't we?" "Because people above you might not like it." "I'm above me." She laughed. "Okay, but you know what I mean. People who care more about margins than people. They're not going to be making those calls anymore." "Even if the numbers dip?" He looked her in the eye. "If the numbers dip and the people are treated right, I'll live with it. But I don't think they will." That night, Franklin sat in the office alone and reviewed the month's data. Sales were flat, not up, but complaints had dropped to almost nothing. More importantly, employee hours were stable, and no one had called out unexpectedly. That told him more than any chart ever could. He drafted a memo, not for the public, but for his leadership team. It was clear, direct, and left no room for interpretation. All store managers are expected to work one floor shift per week minimum. Department heads must rotate through at least one store per quarter to meet frontline employees. Any policy that discourages food donations will be rewritten. And any management style that uses fear as a tool will not be tolerated. Not under any circumstances. He hit send, then leaned back in the chair. The next morning, he arrived early again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to see the faces that made the business real. Kendra was reading a textbook between customers, sipping coffee from her own mug. Louis was humming while prepping apples, using a brand new scale that had arrived 2 days earlier. Manny gave him a nod from behind the rack of rising dough. Patrice handed off a shift report with no issues logged. No one was rushing to thank him. No one was cheering. But they were steady, focused, present. Franklin stepped behind the counter and took over the register for Kendra's break without a word. He didn't need to ask what needed doing anymore. He already knew.